His level 7 speech and what's in a habit. So Keith, you're very welcome tonight. Thank you.
Good evening all, Madam Toastmaster, Madam President, fellow Toastmasters and guests. Tonight I'm going to talk to you about habits. Hopefully by the end of tonight you'll be able to go away and triumph over any of those habits you have that you would like to replace. I say replace and not change, and that will become apparent as we go through it. So, starting off, who's made New Year's resolutions this year? Wow, we have some people actually admitting it as well. How successful were you with those?
No.
A mix. A mixture. Anyone any idea on how successful, as a percentage, they think people are generally with New Year's resolutions? 25?
5%.
5%. Anyone else?
20.
20.
Lady.
We have 8%. This is from the Journal of Psychology, and it was only done in January of this year. The study that was done, 8%. What's more fascinating is like 1 in 4 people, 24% of people actually never in their whole lifetime achieve their New Year's resolutions, which is quite scary really. We'll go on to see now, look at some of the science behind it, which will explain why it's not as easy as it sounds. What we have is in MIT in the 1990s, neuroscientists were doing some research and they found out about a particular part of the brain. It's called the basal ganglia. It's one of the oldest parts of the brain, right in the center, and normally only associated with movement, but they found out this actually plays a big part in the formation of habits. I'm going to go into that more in a minute, but to start with, the cerebral cortex is at the front of our brain. That's the thinking part of our brain, so anytime we have to concentrate on something really hard, it's the cerebral cortex that actually gets us through that. Now, the relationship between the basal ganglia and the cerebral cortex is when we're learning a new task, the cerebral cortex takes it. When it becomes more routine, it gets passed over to the basal ganglia, which just sounds really weird to say. I don't know if anyone else wants to try it. So how habits are formed. Learning to drive, I just ask people to take themselves back to when they learned to drive, if they can remember what that was first like when they got in the car. That was all cerebral cortex, because you had to concentrate on everything when you first started. There's nothing was happening automatically. You're trying to get your feet and your hands working together. It was all concentration. Now, how many people have driven for 5 minutes and realized, I don't know how I got here? Anyone? That's all basal ganglia. So it's the different parts of the brain it hands over. Now, what the neuroscientists discovered was the different levels of activity in the brain. So this is where the part about habits. They figured out that when it goes into the basal ganglia's activity goes through the roof. This was the new discovery. The one thing that's actually quite scary about the basal ganglia is once a habit goes in, so once it's in there and it's in the brain and the brain has remembered it, it's actually permanent. You can't get rid of it. It's something that say you don't forget how to ride a bike, you really don't. It's in there. So there's no changing. So it's good habit, bad habit, it's in. There is hope, however. A guy called Charles Duhigg wrote a book called The Power of Habits, which I'd recommend to anyone, very good book. He talks about habit loops. Now there's different stages to the habit loops. The first one is cue. There's certain cues and triggers that happen that make us do certain things, carry out certain behaviours. The routine is the habit itself, or what we do, and habits can be doing action habits, they can be thinking habits, they could be emotional response habits. They are anything that we do without much thought. The reward is another part of the habit loops. That's what makes us remember the habit. It tells our brain this is worth remembering. So a habit won't work unless there is reward there. And the thing that really glues them all together are the neurological cravings. The compulsion is easier to say. This is the part that makes us do it again and again and again. So the reward that goes into the brain, there's actually a chemical response that happens in the brain at the time of the reward. So it's not just psychological. There's actually a dopamine release in the brain when the habit is created. So that encourages us to do it again and again. Some of the cues that we get around habits, I'm sure some of these you might recognise. Location. Could be certain places you go to. Might be a case of you go past a certain coffee shop and you decide to go in and have a coffee. Time. Certain times of the day. The 3 p.m. slump in the afternoon. If you're anyone who's worked in an office, there's always a time of the day when you're thinking about actually maybe going to the vending machine. I'll talk a little bit more about that later on as well. Emotional state. Someone gets stressed. I'm an ex-smoker and I used to get into an emotional state. I'd always reach for a cigarette. Other people. Could be a friend that you went to college with and you always went drinking. You only see them every 2 years now, but every time you meet each other, you go drinking again because that's what you always did. It's just part of it. And an immediately preceding action would be another one. This is immediately preceding action could be something like having a meal. So you have a meal and light a cigarette after it. So there's just those triggers are there. And it's just a picture. There has to be a reward for it to work. Now I'm going to go through this very quickly. So you have a repeated cue, followed by a repeated routine and a repeated reward. This sets up an expectation. That expectation is what's going to create the habit. The repeated cue will always be the same once it's in the basal ganglia, and the expected reward will always be the same. It's the bit in the middle, the habit. When we get the cue, our brain automatically expects the reward. That's where we get the craving. That's what makes us want to do it again. And there's those times where you think there's something missing. So in order to overcome this, what we need to do is change the cue. We can't change the cue, we can't change the reward, we can change the actual routine. So we need to analyse ourselves, have a look at what we do and figure out what are the cues. Once we know what the cues are and we know what the rewards are, we can try and recreate a new routine that will work off the same things. An example would be the vending machine in the afternoon. One of the studies Charles Duhigg did in the book was he actually wrote down the time of the day it was happening. He wrote down what he did when he went to the vending machine. And there was a number of rewards he was possibly getting. One of them was the actual sugar, his blood sugar levels were low. Another one was the fact that he got to socialise with people. Another one was he just took a break. But he had to actually look at that over a period of time to try and figure out which reward it was. Once you know what the reward is, you can replace it with something else. So if the reward was taking a break, he could go for a 5-minute walk around the block and it could have the same effect without him eating the chocolate and putting the weight on. So if you remember, our brain's set up to remember whether it's good or whether it's bad. The way we're set up, that's the habits are going in. We can't get rid of them. What we can do is replace them. If we can understand the habit loops and what makes us tick, then that gives us an opportunity to actually make a change. And by consciously analysing ourselves, hopefully we can figure out the cues and rewards and change some of those unwanted behaviours. As well.
Well done.